Kim, how did you resist the temptation to make the film more avowedly, explicitly political? It's not a document in that way. It's not a manifesto. The film is more nuanced, and you must have at some point had to resist the temptation to be louder.
I knew there were a whole number of different films that could be made. One would be a very overt gun reform advocacy movie. Another might be about the shooter, and the other that I felt strongly about, and Maria joined forces with me early on, that we both felt strongly about, was the story, in fact, of Aftermath and the point of view of an entire community as a whole, and how the trajectory of what this looks like years out.
Within Newtown, we rarely talk about the events of what has happened, yet when we're in a forum like this, we talk about it. Now, from the medical perspective, I do know that there's a number of us collectively that still have not recovered. Many of my friends and family and colleagues have not gone back to work. Many are in therapy. Many of us have had job changes or moved out of town. So the recovery phase will continue for years and even generations to come.
It's ever present, but you can also see glimmers of change, and sometimes change is part of the recovery. So it's complicated.
One of the things we hope that the film can do that's different by redefining victim as an entire community is to hear from, to have the film help lift up and strengthen the voices of first responders and teachers and priests and doctors who are becoming more and more vocal, so that people are hearing that through different stakeholders in communities.
One anecdote about the power of these kinds of films is that Congressman Himes from Connecticut was actually in the audience, and it was he the next morning who walked out of the House chamber on Paul Ryan's call for a moment of silence. And he said, no more moments of silence. I saw the film Newtown last night at my friends from Newtown, and no more silence.
The gun lobby has actually said, well, wait a minute, this is a mental health crisis. This is not about guns. This is about mental health. And so that was their argument to say, there's no reason to restrict the use of gun ownership. But you would say? I would say that if you look at any developed country in this world, we have the same percentage of mental health issues. Okay, the same percentage of mental health issues. We are not crazier. We are not crazier in the United States. What we do have is an exponentially high number of gun deaths per capita. So compared to other developed countries, we have evidence for a few times as many to almost 100 times as many gun deaths. So for instance, in Japan, I think last year they had like 6 gun deaths the whole year. 6. We've had over 33,000. But there probably are cases in your career where there are mistakes that are made and the witness is not going to look good, but she might be telling the truth. In this case, she probably wasn't. And at the same time, would it have still been the impulse of the DA's office to dismiss the case or not bring the case because they had a bad witness?
Inconsistencies, as Ben knows, as all of you who are lawyers know, come up in many cases, and there are inconsistencies that make great good sense. And sometimes a witness is interviewed the first time by a cop at a station house and leaves out a detail or changes whether she did something with her left hand or her right hand. In this case in particular, the accuser testified in the grand jury under oath to facts, and then the story changed. And they were not insignificant facts that changed after she testified under oath. There were at least 2 alternate versions of the events in the room that Vance was very specific about in writing his recommendation of dismissal.
The one thing that I know about Cy Vance, that most people who know about Cy Vance, I think he's an honest man, and I think he's a man of integrity. And I think at the end of the day, he concluded that he could not win the case, not because there were good lawyers involved, but because you had a complaining witness who told a different story each time she was interviewed, and that generally dooms a prosecutor's case.
And I think that Strauss-Kahn really didn't want to be president, in so many ways. That's why the
Did
dialogue
not, did
it
not.
did not, and that's why the dialogue is so great when she says, "You did it at the last minute. You did it, and I did everything my whole life I wanted you to be." Because there was this kind of, she was an extraordinarily ambitious woman and a very successful journalist on French television and became a star. And he, knowing that he was an addict, knowing that he could not really, can you imagine if he had been president and he would have been caught doing this? It would have been terrible.
There's two cases going on here. There's the legal system and there's the court of public opinion. You know, you went to law school, you didn't go to PR school.
Her lawyer, who unfortunately recently passed away, he allowed her to be interviewed by Robin Roberts. And I think what he tried to do, which really did not work, he tried to turn the public opinion on his side to such a large degree that he thought it would influence Cy Vance and make him tentative about dismissing the case. You cannot try and get a good press day at the risk of costing you the win of the case. Because if you lose the case, no one will ever remember the good press day. On the other hand, if you get a bad press day, bad press day, bad press day, but you win, no one's going to remember those bad press days.
I get questions from students in my course on the history of the Holocaust. How do we know that the Diary of Anne Frank is real? Or some will come to me and say, Professor Lipstadt, what evidence do we have for the gas chambers? This was all before my trial, which meant, exactly as you're saying, that denial arguments had infiltrated into the mainstream. These students didn't even know that the questions they were asking were informed by deniers.
And this is a troubling phenomenon, the ease with which Western societies controversialize what ought to be simply taboo. On subject after subject, the implicit tendency in a free society, and I don't know if there's any cure for this, is, well, David Irving in the audience has a point of view, and this lady has a point of view.
Two sides to every issue.
Two sides to every issue, and that is a profoundly problematic fact. I don't think the answer is simply to say, well, the person in the audience has to be shut down because the cure ends up being worse than the disease. But it is the reality of free societies that we turn what ought to be settled questions into these intriguing controversies where the attention naturally goes to the person raising the controversy, breaking the taboo.
That's right.
They're not immoral, they're iconoclastic.
Right. They're facts and they're opinions and they're lies. And Holocaust deniers are liars. And so they want these lies to be brought into the conversation as opinions to then impact the facts. And I think that the minute you engage them in conversation and debate, you are turning them from liars into opinions.
What I worry about is that the role of the gatekeeper of culture has been diminished, that these people who have these responsibilities fall one way or the other, either being such strict gatekeepers that they're keeping out all kinds of interesting, if controversial opinions for fear of offending this, that, or the other person, or on the other hand, no gatekeeper role at all. Anyone can say what they want.
But the internet, for all its glories, is one of the things that is taking down the role played by gatekeepers because there aren't
no
any.
oversight.
I mean, it's freedom unbound. It may be the greatest, really, new
And
development
God forbid you should challenge it.
since Gutenberg. But the result is that there are no standards.
When college newspapers began to publish ads by Holocaust deniers, some of them said, you know, well, we want to keep an open mind on the issue. And I don't know who was the first person to say this, but sometimes if your mind is so open, your brains fall out, you know? I wish I could claim credit for that, but they also said some of these editors said, well, it's free speech. Free speech doesn't mean you have a right to place your ad, you know, if the college has a certain policy, or you have a right to a column. They gave them op-ed columns, so there should be two sides to every issue, and that's the danger.
It is a little harder, I think, than that.
Yeah, I know that. I was simplifying.
Because it is free speech.
I knew he was going to say that.
It's bad speech. And
But do I have to give them room on the op-ed page?
No, you don't have to give them room on the op-ed page. But when you have a policy If this were a state school, for example, it would violate the First Amendment to ban them from publishing the ad. That's one of the prices of the First Amendment.